listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have another good show for you today. I'll be kicking off hour one discussing the $484 billion Corona deal that just passed the Senate. I can't honestly tell if Democrats are mind-bendingly worthless or just heartlessly conniving. I'll explain what I mean in a moment. A bit later, we'll be discussing a recent report on shocking rates of infection in Los Angeles. Also, with the rates dramatically higher than originally thought, what does this mean for the transmission of the virus through businesses that continue to remain open as a necessary service? Later in the first hour, we'll be discussing Trump's new glitter bomb, his executive order temporarily banning immigration into the United States. I call it a glitter bomb because it's only to distract. For one, our consulates are not granting interviews necessary for visas for immigration that someone who is trying to immigrate into the United States would require in order to kickstart that process. Also, the United States is the epicenter of the coronavirus at this point. Nowhere is even close. Spain has a quarter of our number, and we are at this point around 800,000. Who is migrating to the United States under these conditions? We have a perfect storm in regards to not having a healthcare system, in regards to forcing people to go to work, in regards to these protests that are out there. Who on earth is migrating to the United States? Which means why or what is the real reason that Trump is doing this? We're going to talk about that later in the first hour. In the second hour, we're going to continue with domestic politics with a conversation on what Joe Biden's foreign policy will look like. Also, a recent study shows that American attitudes towards China on both sides of the political spectrum are decidedly negative. Considering Biden and Trump have been scapegoating China for either blame or political points, I suppose the numbers, regardless of how high, are not all that shocking. Last but not least, today is Hump Day. Now, I don't mean this in a dirty way, unless that strikes your fancy. There's no judgment here. I just mean that today is our Revelation segment. Now, this is one of my favorite segments. Typically, I am on here talking about UFOs or consciousness or something that's just kind of far out there. The topic today is out there. It's astonishing, but in an entirely different way. We're going to deal with real-world politics, but a revelation in the political space. So definitely stay tuned for that. That's always a good segment. But let's start here. We have another stimulus bill. Congress, the Senate, finally got together and came up with a stimulus bill. This is political reporting. The agreement centers around providing $380 billion for small businesses and also includes $75 billion for hospitals, $25 billion for disease testing. It comes after a brutal conflict between party leaders over how to pass a massive bill with the Senate in recess. A pair of conservative Republicans, Mike Lee of Utah and Rand Paul of Kentucky, railed against the process on Texas afternoon but allowed the bill to go through without objecting. The House is expected to take up the legislation on Thursday with overwhelming bipartisan support per Senate House aides. Now, yes, it may have overwhelming support in the House. But not everybody is happy about this. I am not. And just so happens, now there's AOC. Let's hear AOC push back on this particular bill.
And if we are going to bring every member or call back almost every member who can back to DC to pass a small incremental bill, and with the knowledge that we are not coming back until next month again, that's 2 rent checks. And the last time we left, again, we lost over 9/11's worth of people due to this lack of action. And so we really need to acknowledge that this small bill, whilst again, something is better than nothing. And frankly, Democrats fought very, very hard to get Basic things like testing. Republicans didn't want to fund hospitals. They didn't want to fund mass testing, which is what is actually going to allow us to reopen the economy. So I appreciate the strides that they made in that. But ultimately, in voting on the text of this bill, knowing that we are abdicating our responsibility.
Yes, that's exactly what you're doing. The House of Representatives is owned by the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi. It is not as if Nancy Pelosi can't pass legislation in order to rival whatever the Republicans are coming up with and forcing the Republican parties to deal with it. They don't do that at all. They are effectively folding themselves in lockstep with whatever else the Republicans is coming up with, meaning they're just responding. They don't have this kind of uniform vision of what they want to do. There was a poll, I think it was back in 2016, that says, what does the Democratic Party stand for? And the overwhelming majority of the people in the poll said it stands for being in opposition to Trump. I would wager the same thing will be true here. This is the moment where they should be knocking this out of the park. You're in the middle of a pandemic. You're part of the Democratic Party. You scream to high heaven about being for universal health care. And in the middle of a healthcare crisis where people are stuck in their homes, the best that you guys can come up with is $1,200. $1,200. Again, it's not as if the Democratic Party couldn't pass legislation from the House to rival whatever the Republican Party is coming up with and have a fight over what gets through. They're fighting over testing. Understand what I'm saying? They're fighting. Meaning the Democratic Party is fighting tooth and nail just to get testing in the bill. That's like saying, I take care of my kids. That's not something you should have to fight for. And even if you are fighting for it, you should wring the Republicans' neck using that particular point. But using the House of Representatives, meaning the fight that you're having in the Senate shouldn't just be in the Senate, it also should be in the House, because that's the area to which you control. What is going on with the Democratic Party? Are they that weak, or are they that politically conniving? Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Donald Trump is taking on a particular political strategy where his plan is basically, I am representing the interests of the 1%. That's all he's done the entire time he's been in office. And in pursuit of representing the interests of the 1%, I want to get people back to work because I represent the owner class, and that owner class is not going to be out there at 8 hours working, bussing tables or working at some particular store or some restaurant or massage therapy place. No, they're the owner class. They're going to hang in front of their $12,000 icebox. They're going to eat their ice cream, and they're going to call and cash their checks. That's what they're going to do. It's everybody else. It's us that ends up in the process of working at those particular organizations, putting our lives at risk. Now, the catch here is that this particular bill, or that Donald Trump, or that particular strategy that Donald Trump is going along with, is trying to incentivize people to agitate and go out and doing exactly what they're doing. Meaning all of these people who are in all of these various states to some degree are being manipulated. No, I don't necessarily like to take away agency from people, but it is literally the political strategy that Donald Trump is going on with. And the Democratic Party is going along with it. I hope you understand what I mean. When Trump mentioned the $1,200 checks, which is nothing, they didn't get rid of the people's bills, they didn't get rid of their expenses, they didn't get rid of their car note, house note, electric bill, all of these other bills that these people have to deal with, and your government gives you $1,200. You've paid into this government regarding taxes for the entirety of your life. $1,200. And Mnuchin comes out and says that should last people for about 10 weeks. They withheld the checks. They held up the checks just to put Trump's name on it. And while I understand the political effect of it, think of the level of callousness that's associated with doing something like that. Money that those people need to subsist, that you recognize they need to subsist. 43% of the population has either lost their job or is losing hours in their jobs. Meaning you have a large share of this population that is vulnerable, that is struggling. And what does Trump do? Nothing. At least not in the real terms of making sure that the American public is whole and taking rational policy to ensure that they're not incentivized to go outside and agitate to get back to work. My point is the strategy that Donald Trump is taking is explicitly in the interest of the 1% to create as much havoc and stress within the population as possible to incentivize these people to agitate in the exact way they're agitating to open up the economy. He doesn't want his hands entirely on it because it's against what the experts want. But if he believes he can get this kind of astroturf of people showing up around the nation saying, open it up, open it up, open it up, that maybe he can get enough political will to do so. It is massively cynical politics because, again, the entire point of this will get people killed. What does he do for the secondary argument, though? Fox News. Because Fox News has started to take the argument that basically people die. And in the pursuit of starting up the economy, it's okay if people die. So meaning all of this stuff is just political casting. The catch becomes, what is the Democratic Party doing? I can't curse. I don't want to curse. What is the Democratic Party doing? How do you have a branch of government and you allow the Republican Party to effectively run the House? That the public looks at Trump and believes that Trump is more effective than Joe Biden dealing with this particular issue, despite the fact that Trump is utterly incompetent and he has gotten thousands killed. Do you realize that drug that Donald Trump had been telling people to use has killed more people and has not necessarily shown effectiveness to deal with the disease? That's Trump. But they've allowed him to run the House on this. My question is why? Are they that weak and ineffective? And if so, we have a severe problem. Because we've allowed no accountability in the political process for so long that when you actually need them to deal with a crisis and be effective in dealing with that crisis for anything more than token gestures, then they can't do it. They fall flat. They should be knocking this out of the park and they're falling flat. The other side, are they just that politically conniving? Meaning they understand what Trump is doing, but they also understand that this pathway is going to end up getting a lot of people killed. And in the process of getting a lot of people killed, Trump may actually end up losing that election if he can't find somebody else to blame. I don't know which one it is. Bob, help me out. Is it just utterly conniving or utterly worthless? You be the judge, Bob. It's one or the other. There can't be anything else.
Well, it's an interesting question, given that you played a clip by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who in many ways is being cast as the future leadership of a new party, a new movement, something farther to the left of what the Democratic Party gives you. Because otherwise, the Democratic Party is conniving. I mean, they're completely a part of conniving right now. They're completely a part of what the Republicans are doing. Everything is this neoliberal public-private partnership. Let's work with major corporations to advance America. And both of the parties have been captured by special interests. That's big money. That's big companies that don't care about us, the people. And so obviously in this situation, they're not going to give people out that money. Jamarl, the biggest thing for me really, and I think we need to continue to talk about this, is why do millions upon millions of Americans live in debt at any point? Because anytime you have a shock to the system, people that are already living in debt are only going to be pushed further to the margins. It makes no sense that we live in a debt economy. I understand that's part of the whole deal here in the United States, and we pressure other countries to allow us to do that. But this whole stress of being in constant debt just shows that it has psychological and physical ramifications,
that is
Jamarl, and I think we need to continue to amplify that. It's just a broken economic model and system, and in the worst of times, which we're seeing right now, it completely fails to respond to the needs of people. Jamarl, we have a big show for our listeners out there. In the first hour, we talk about the spike of violence in Afghanistan in the middle of a peace process, a shocking new study from California of number of asymptomatic COVID-19 cases, and Donald Trump's latest executive order on immigration. And if that is not enough, we have a second hour of news, politics, and culture after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Tune in every Wednesday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou for a regular segment called Beyond Nuclear, where Brian and John discuss nuclear issues, including weapons, energy, waste, and the future of nuclear technology in the United States, with Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at the organization Beyond Nuclear. Listen on Wednesdays right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, kind of, sort of. We're still separated. We're staying at home, but we're still live here on Radio Sputnik 105.5 FM here in the nation's capital, or hopefully you're checking us out on YouTube, the Progressive Soapbox, Facebook Live, or you can tweet us at Sputnik Misfits to stay in touch. We want to be in touch with you. Thank you for listening. We continue our show now to look at the latest from Afghanistan and the slowing, to say the least, efforts by the U.S. government to leave the country. Here to talk more about the Afghanistan peace process is Dr. Marvin Weinbaum, Director of Afghanistan and Pakistan Studies at the Middle East Institute. Dr. Weinbaum, thank you for joining us.
Certainly.
Well, Dr. Weinbaum, about 2 months ago, it was clear that the implementation of the U.S. Taliban deal for the U.S. to remove troops from the country wasn't moving very quickly. At the heart of the slowdown has been the condition that Afghan government was to release up to 5,000 Taliban prisoners, and the Taliban would free up to 1,000 detainees by March 10th. While Ashraf Ghani rejected the demand, and it has begun a phased release of 1,500 prisoners, while the insurgents have freed 40 detainees, this all now seems to be further complicated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Reuters reported a source familiar with the matter who spoke on condition of anonymity said, quote, if a good number of prisoners on either side contract the disease or die in prison because of an outbreak, it will be a humanitarian issue and it will make intra-Afghan negotiations that much more difficult. Dr. Weinbaum, I have to imagine when this deal was penned that the parties were not realistically thinking all prisoners were to be released. Was this part of a deal? Was this part of the deal a poison pill from the beginning?
Well, as I understand it, the heart of the deal was that as far as the U.S. and the Taliban were concerned, is there would be pretty much an immediate release of the 5,000. The trouble was that the Kabul government was not party to that agreement. They obviously did not share the view that they would release. It wasn't a matter of 1,000 against 5,000. It was a matter of the fact that the Taliban say, well, look, I'm sorry, the government saying that if we do this, really, is that all we're getting in exchange? Because you're asking us to give up, and Taliban specified this. They wanted up front the top 15 who are effectively the most important of the prisoners. So the Taliban found that the Kabul government was just not prepared to simply accept the agreement that they hadn't been party to. And that's where things started off. Ultimately, the U.S. put enormous pressure on the Ghani government to say, well, look, we agreed to this. And the government said, yeah, but we didn't. But what we will do, and they took a little while to decide this, is that we'll release them in batches of 100 up to 1,500. And that's where we are today. And, you know, the real message here is that on something like this, where they cannot come together, it leaves you to wonder how in heaven's name could they ever expect to sign somehow a peace agreement with all of the many, many multitude of factors that have to go into creation of effectively a new state. Surely this has to be a message here that in the simplest of steps, there is a lack of communication and a lack of compromise.
Well, tell me more about that, though, because the lack of communication is clearly coming in many parts in the from the American side of things. If the Americans aren't including in the Afghan government, and then the first thing that happens now after the prisoner swaps don't continue, you have Taliban attacks at Afghan security forces there over the last weekend. We saw in parts of the country over 29 members of the security forces were killed by the Taliban. The Taliban is not targeting the U.S. military right now. They're targeting the Afghan government, and it was the U.S. that independently, unilaterally worked with the Taliban to pen this deal. So if you're the Afghan government, aren't you on the outside looking in saying, well, what's our role in this? And if we're the ones under attack here, why are we caring about what the U.S. has agreed with when it comes to Taliban prisoner swaps?
Oh, that's right. That's right. They say, well, you signed your agreement. But the way it's worked out, though, those attacks have been continuing. The Taliban never said that they were going to honor a ceasefire. They would not be attacking American forces if the United States agreed to leave within that 15 months period, and the U.S. has started a withdrawal. So the Taliban weren't really compromising or anything except that they would not be shooting at the Americans as they were preparing to leave. Now, what's happened is this. At the same time, they're attacking forces, yes, and civilians are getting killed too. But we hear mostly about the larger scale operations where outposts of the police or the regular army are getting shot at. Now, this is done, and this has angered the Taliban, who said, well, this wasn't part of the agreement. The U.S. has come to the defense of those beleaguered security forces, as it has all along, not on the same scale, certainly, because its use of its bombing capacity was rather extensive before the agreement was signed with the Taliban. Now what they have done is they cut back on that, but the U.S. is selectively coming to the rescue of forces on the ground. That's very important because it's very, very possible that if there were not the air support, the security forces would be able to hold out. They would stay unified because they've been accustomed here able to call in air support when they needed it.
Hey,
this has really been a stabilizing factor because is the case. The Taliban control no major population centers. It's because of that factor.
So, Marvin, I got a question for you. This is Jamarl speaking. Is listening to you explain this, and just from what I understand of what has been taking place over the last year or so, especially during the negotiations, will the pulling out of the United States basically cause the collapse of Afghanistan? Meaning, it seems like the Taliban is either a stronger force or at the very least commiserate with whatever Afghanistan is putting up. And under those guidelines, with the United States pulling out, would this create this kind of Vietnam effect? The U.S. pulls out and the government collapses. Would that be something to that effect? And would the United States ever reinvade Afghanistan in order to prop up the Afghan government, if so?
I'll answer your last. Why I can't see the U.S. going down. What's to happen if everything went well is that with the agreement and the Afghans and the Taliban, various factions within the Afghan state would then be sitting down within 10 days of the agreement signing. They would sit down together and they would begin the process of dialogue and then serious negotiations. That, as we know, has not happened. It's a month or so since the signing of the agreement, and now with the virus and the curtailment of traffic of airport, it's doubtful if they even wanted to that they could meet, say, in some other place, because they spoke about could be in the Gulf. Now even that seems improbable. In answer to the question you're asking, that no expectation is that with the U.S. leaving, and it would be a gradual process, let's say over 14 months, over this time, they would make the kind of progress that then raise the possibility, or at least lessen the possibility, that there would be a collapse of the Afghan security forces. But that's a very real possibility, as I'm suggesting. If there were negotiations going on, and if I wanted to see them continue, then that would be a constraint on the Taliban to take advantage of this, it would be getting a real possibility over the long run that they would get what they needed militarily. Politically, they could get it. Politically, they could get it, because is that they are really going into these negotiations.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and Jamarl, to your point, in so many ways we can make high-level agreements between different governments or leaders in the country, but ultimately for me, and I would be curious, Dr. Weinbaum, you have more experience than I do in the region, is how the people there are actually dealing with decades of war and the traumas that come along with it. It was a great piece in the BBC this last week. It was talking about Kabul's Juvenile Rehabilitation Center, and they were talking in the article about how the center usually holds about 300 youth, the ages between 12 and 18. On average, around half of the youth there are accused of being in militant groups, the Islamic State or the Taliban. The conditions are horrific. The stories are repetitive. Most of the boys are in the detention center were poor, had no future, and were co-opted and radicalized. Dr. Weinbaum, even if there was some sort of peace deal or high-level talks there, we still have generational trauma among the population that must be addressed. And we also have health disparities just between the nations here of the world. There in Afghanistan, thinking about COVID-19 coming to that country, there's major issues at a very structural level in that country that also need to be dealt with, regardless of whatever talks happen at these higher levels.
Yeah, all of that. As far as the concerned, they're yearning for peace. There's been continuous warfare since 1975, when there was the first rebellion here against a sitting government. And so they are now at the same time and there is, with this kind of desperation here for relief from conflict. They are really prepared to make compromises here, but there are also red lines. I would say overwhelmingly the population does not want to go back to the 1990s when the Taliban had created their emirate. That was remember, 1/3 of the country was out of the country, and that's a prospect in the future as well. They don't want to go back to that. I was in Kabul when the Taliban after they had taken over. It was a graveyard. A woman could not walk on the street. I never saw a woman except for two women begging. Each time that I was in Kabul. They don't want to go back to that. They couldn't put on the radio, television. They love music. They could not listen to music. But it goes farther than that. The educational system was gone. All of the vital services were being performed by international organizations and NGOs. So they don't want that either, but they want peace. And the hope here is that somehow the Taliban would be different this time, but they have never really suggested in all of the discussions that we had that they wanted something other than an Islamic emirate. They do not want a political system which is based on popular will, because popular is not the basis in at least their notion of a Islamic system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hear you, and I appreciate you mentioning the underlying desire for the vast majority of humans on this planet for peace. I think that's an important thing to remember here on Earth Day of all days. That was Dr. Marvin Weinbaum, the Director of Afghanistan and Pakistan Studies at the Middle East Institute. Dr. Weinbaum, I know you keep busy. Where can people find more of your work, or what can they be looking forward for by you?
Regularly, we have the Middle East Institute's website. We have pieces that I write once a week on Pakistan and Afghanistan. But really, there's so much material out there on the internet, and many of the think tanks in Washington have regular programs that, by accessing their website, you can listen to webcast. There really is a lot of information out there right now. A lot
Yep, that's great. That's MEI.edu, Middle East Institute, MEI.edu. Dr. Weinbaum, thank you again for joining us. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Guts and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamarl Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Brahim from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Line with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We continue our show today talking about the shocking story. Jamarl, I had to slide this in here. I read the numbers here and did the math on the back of an envelope, and I got real confused real quickly because the numbers I've been seeing reported every day, I think are going to dramatically change in ways no one was expecting. A new study out from the University of Southern California's Sol Price School of Public Policy found that hundreds of thousands of Los Angeles County residents may have been infected with the coronavirus by early April, far outpacing the number of officially confirmed cases. This initial results from the first large-scale study tracking the spread of the coronavirus in the county found that 4.1% of adults have antibodies to the virus in their blood, an indication of past exposure. So as you remember, antibody tests are just starting to roll out. Many of them are still not perfect. They need to be tested several times, some false positives, but they're starting to test people's blood to see if you've already had the coronavirus. Jamarl, 4.1% doesn't sound like much on paper there at a snapshot, but that translates to roughly 220,000 to 442,000 adults who could have recovered from an infection. Once margin of error is taken into account, according to the researchers conducting the study, that means up to 400,000 people in Los Angeles County alone have already had COVID-19. Wow. The county has only reported 8,000. Let that sink in right now. The official number of cases in the U.S. is being reported at just over 825,000. Jamarl, if you add in 400,000 right there, the number jumps, and that's just from one county now that they're learning in that. Throw that 825,000 number out the window. It's in the millions easily. The findings suggest, and I guess a silver lining, the fatality rate may be much lower than previously thought. As the number of people who are tested show antibodies, that means they survived the virus. As those numbers increasingly increase, the fatality rates will decrease. Both studies now estimate that COVID-19 mortality rate of 0.1% to 0.2% is closer to the death rate associated with the seasonal flu. It should also be noted that although the virus may be more widespread, the infection rate still falls far short of herd immunity that, absent a vaccine, would be key to return to normal life. Jamarl, it's a shocking story in many ways because we're seeing the scale of the numbers. It reminds us last week, we remember the USS Teddy Roosevelt, where those sailors were on the ship and they found 213 of them were exhibiting symptoms, and they went and tested everyone on the ship, and they all of a sudden jumped to about 650 positive tests. So there was almost double the number of symptoms were asymptomatic people. And so if we have all of these cases and we're only testing those with it, that means if it's 825,000 and you do simple math and say half of the cases are asymptomatic, that means 1.67 million people have had the coronavirus. And I don't know why we're still trusting anything coming out of official reports from the White House at this point. If that's the numbers from the White House, we shouldn't trust them if every other thing has been a lie along the way.
Yeah.
Shocking
yeah,
story
that is
here.
a shocking story. Trump is clownish, and I've pointed out before that his incompetence has caused a lot of people to get injured and potentially die. Not to mention for, again, prescribing reality show hosts, firing has-been celebrities, prescribing medication to the American population. And again, the studies come out saying, yeah, not so much. That doesn't do the job, and people have lost their lives over this stuff.
Jamarl, how much is he lying, and then how much is he just him and his team have no experience in any of this stuff? I don't think they have the actual number. I don't think they're like hiding the actual count. I just genuinely think we're not doing nearly enough tests in this country. That's a fact. So he's not lying. I mean, when you get the wrong answer on a test, are you lying?
I don't think he's no. When he's going out there telling people that, yeah, I feel like this medication is a good medication. Well, I mean, he clearly doesn't have the experience to make that argument. But I do think I don't think he's lying about the numbers in the explicit sense that the numbers are being reported wrong. I think it's not enough testing. It's like the California thing, for example. If you had, let's say, a proliferation of testing where you could pretty much test anybody that you wanted to, you might have found all of these people. And you might have been able to say, okay, well, the number of people who are asymptomatic is much higher than we thought, et cetera. You can make some kind of calculation. But the moment when you don't have those testing, well, you don't have it. And it seems that there are certain people who are, again, more susceptible than others. Even though these people might be asymptomatic, your grandmother may not be, the guy with kidney failure may not be, the guy with diabetes or with high blood. It's almost like a time bomb of sorts where some people might be okay, but others not so much. So.
Yeah, and then obviously in some places he's just lying when he says we have more tests than any other country when simply don't, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of this. It's really amazing just the more information that comes out. Another story from California, from Santa Clara County, said on Tuesday there in California, it had identified 2 people who died from COVID-19 in early and mid-February, weeks before what was initially reported as the nation's first coronavirus was found in Washington state. So, Jamarl, that means there is a major shift now in the timeline for the virus spread in the country much earlier than we initially believed. The new fatalities are significant and that they could dramatically extend the amount of time cases of the virus were spreading undetected in parts of the country before social distancing measures and stay-at-home orders were put in place. So we have no accurate count still of how many people have the disease, and we still do not have a clear timetable of when the virus entered the country. Jamarl, I just got to imagine there's quite a few other unknown unknowns out there, if I could borrow a phrase.
From Rumsfeld.
To be discovered.
Look, that's always the case, right? I mean, it would be impossible to know when the first case started. It's like, how could that ever be known? Especially with people being asymptomatic, meaning those people could have been spreading that virus for a very long time before people realize, oh my God, it's X or it's Y. I care more about what they do in order to deal with the virus once it starts. Because to me, that's where it becomes, that much more important in regards to pandemics happen. You just, as a society, have to deal with those pandemics and put the resources necessary to deal with it. And I guess my biggest ire, and the thing that bugs me more than anything else, is that in the middle of a pandemic, they still went with this notion that the public mattered less. That's a mind-blowing thing for the public to have to reconcile with, and I got to be honest, I don't know if the public has.
Well, let me add to the math equation here now, Jamarl, for you, because this goes into how we continue to deal with the public. So first, undercounting of coronavirus cases. Then we have unclear timetables and spread of the disease. And now a new story, a new paper, Jamarl, is being released that claims a restaurant's air conditioning spread the coronavirus from one infected diner to 9 others. The paper is set to be published in Emerging Infectious Diseases, a journal produced by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It investigates an incident at an eatery in Guangzhou, China in January, where a family had arrived from Wuhan, the city where COVID-19 pandemic had begun. The report concluded that despite patrons of the restaurant sitting safe distances from one another at the restaurant's air conditioning system was carrying COVID-19 droplets from one infected diner to others. further reports and studies will obviously need to be done because there were still 81 people inside the restaurant, Jamarl, that didn't catch the virus. So, Jamarl, the question again comes to lots of asymptomatic people. A lot of people not necessarily know where the disease is spreading. We're not doing contact tracing, so we're not exactly sure where it is. We know the CDC is telling restaurants and others that if there's a reopening, they're going to have to remove seats and set up some type of social distancing system within the restaurant itself. But now you have things around this idea that air conditioners and the ventilation systems can spread the disease. So for me, I don't think, despite whatever William Barr and Donald Trump are doing to restart the economy, people aren't going to be rushing back out to restaurants and to stores, to concerts, to bars, all of these different places. People are just not going to do it. And that's how you then need to look at what's going to happen with the economy. It's not just a shock to the system. We're back open. This is going to be a long, at least 6 months to a year, if not more,
I partially agree with you and I partially disagree with you. So I do think it's going to be long and deep. I don't think those jobs are going to just flip back on, the moment that that the virus, let's say, exceeds itself. And trying to open the economy back up immediately like this is going to have repercussions. I mean, there are going to be certain states, like, for example, in Kemp, restaurants are one of the things that he wants to open back up. Does he know whether or not the ventilation systems within the restaurants are going to carry a particular illness from one patron to the next, especially since this isn't something that they had to deal with prior? No, he doesn't know. He doesn't care. He just wants to open the economy back up for his donors and for the the 1% class. So like this is a pretty cynical politics, and yeah, they're gonna get a lot of people injured. That's to put it mildly.
Yeah, it's like they're just rolling the dice. But they're like, let's just keep going one more time, regardless of what happened on the last roll. It was like, oh, we lost that one. Let's just
by the way,
again.
you know what I was saying? Look, I think there are going to be people who go. I mean, all of these guys who are creating these kind of, the grassroots stuff of screaming they want to open the economy back up. Those people will be going to those restaurants. Those people will be getting their massages. And some of them will get ill. Some of them will take it and transmit it to somebody else who will get sick. Like, I would say watch for these hot spots in the Republican areas or in these states that are starting to open these places back up early.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me give you the latest numbers here on that topic itself. There's a new national online poll from April 15th through the 21st. It said 72% of adults in the United States said people should stay at home until doctors and public health officials say it is safe. That included 88% of Democrats, 55% of Republicans, and 7 in 10 independents. Among U.S. adults, 42% said they approved of Trump's performance in office, while 52% said they disapproved. The president's overall popularity has been the same for more than a year. When asked specifically about Trump's handling of the coronavirus crisis, 44% approved and 52% disapproved, which is an 8-point drop in net approval since last week and a 13-point drop from last month. So, Jamarl, you have a vast majority of people saying we need to stay at home, and you're now seeing that widening gap of is Trump handling this thing properly or not. That's starting to grow quite a bit, and I think that tension's going to be there. And to your point, to further your point, if there is a few hot flashpoints, whatever you want to call it, big breakouts, it's really going to put a stress on the Trump administration.
Absolutely. I mean, so this is the question that we were asking like a month ago, right? Like, at what point does this start to tear into Donald Trump? And what point do you start to see it go against him if, loss of lives and everything else? So I think we're beginning to see it.
Yeah, it's now. Tomorrow we have a lot more to talk about. After the break, we will talk more about Donald Trump and his latest executive order on immigration. It looks like Trump's bark may have been much larger than his bite on this one. We'll also talk about how those $1,200 checks that some Americans, some of you may have received, are not going to Americans who are married to non-U.S. citizens. Make sense of that one. We'll try to after the break. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We turn our attention now to immigration. Donald Trump has announced a new executive order aimed at immigration in the United States. The executive order came days after Trump had tweeted out, quote, "In light of the attack from the invisible enemy, as well as the need to protect the jobs in our great American citizens, I will be signing an executive order to temporarily suspend immigration into the United States." While the executive order, which was signed yesterday, did not suspend immigration into the United States, it did work to slow down legal immigration efforts and throw yet another cog in the wheel of just and legal entrance for immigrations into the United States. Here is Donald Trump sort of explaining what this executive order will do.
In order to protect American workers, I will be issuing a temporary suspension of immigration into the United States. You heard about that last night. By pausing immigration, we'll help put unemployed Americans first in line for jobs as America reopens. So important. It would be wrong and unjust for Americans laid off by the virus to be replaced with new immigrant labor flown in from abroad. We must first take care of the American worker. Take care of the American worker. This pause will be in effect for 60 days, after which the need for any extension or modification will be evaluated by myself and a group of people based on economic conditions at the time.
There we go. Well, I didn't tell our guests. We have our guest here, Sarah Dady, immigration attorney at Dady Law Group. Sarah, I didn't tell you you would have to listen to Donald Trump speak if you came onto our show, so I do apologize for that. But welcome to Political Misfits.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, Jamarl. It's my pleasure to be here. It is not my pleasure to be talking about yet another attack on immigrants by this administration. But here we are.
Tell us more about this executive order. What did it do and what does it not do?
Okay, well, we're not entirely sure what it does do. Trump said it's a 60-day pause on immigration into the United States. But this is a president who does not understand how our immigration system works. Right now, the U.S. consulates abroad who process immigrant visa applications, they're all closed due to COVID-19. So no immigrant visas are being processed anyway at this moment. So we're not entirely sure what additional 60-day pause is going to be unless the consulates are reopening within 60 days. And then they're just not going to process visa applications for people that already have approved petitions to come into the United States for family reunification.
Yeah. For me, it was tired rhetoric in many ways, right? It sounded just like more talking points from the administration. It didn't actually have any teeth when it came to the policy, and it was pitting immigrants against American workers. And it seems pretty obvious the Trump administration is trying to use this moment to continue to push this anti-immigration sentiment against people all around the world. And since we're in the middle of a pandemic, it seems like it gives them an excuse to use this. But at the same time, it seems like there's still essential workers from around the world coming here to work in different jobs, especially agricultural work.
I agree with you. And there's no better way for Trump to make the invisible enemy visible than to line up his supporters to target immigrants, right? And I think that's mostly what this executive order is. And that's true because, number one, he is exempting low-skilled workers who are not applying for green cards, the temporary worker visas. And he's also exempting immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. But what he's not doing, he said there's an exemption, especially for healthcare workers working with COVID-19 patients. Well, those people are already inside the United States. They're not coming from abroad. They're already here and working. A lot of those, 37,000 of those healthcare workers have DACA, which this president is terminating. Supreme Court's going to release its decision in June saying whether or not they agree that Trump can terminate DACA. Now we're going to have 37,000 healthcare workers who lose their work authorization right here inside the United States.
Do you know how many people are currently coming into the United States with the COVID-19 virus ravaging the country at this point?
Right now, the consulates are not issuing immigrant visas. So there are no new immigrants coming in right now. Consulates are processing visas on an emergency basis only. So really, immigration to the United States is on pause since March 18th.
That's what I was trying to get at. Basically that we're in the middle of a pandemic. Nobody is coming to the United States as a hot spot for the pandemic. And like you said, the consulates are closed, meaning effectively what this does is somewhat unclear. What do you think his reasoning is? I mean, I think there's a politics around immigration that Donald Trump has been successful in 2016. But do you think this is going beyond just an immigration argument into an argument about security, and not just an argument about security, even making this case that I am the guy who's fighting for your jobs? Yes, he's kicking the immigrant in doing so, but basically he is. Do you think he's running for his campaign at this point?
I think it's mostly campaign talk. I mean, he's very clearly an immigration restrictionist. His base supporters are immigration restrictionists. Immigration restrictionists have been with us since the founding of the country. I'm sure that restrictionists were upset that General Lafayette got to lead troops in the U.S. Revolutionary War. So it's the old saw. Immigrants take American jobs, which is not true. We know, based on data, that immigrants complement the U.S. workforce. It's also whipping up his base, saying, look, I'm building the wall and I stopped these immigrants from coming into the United States. When he ran in 2016, his big thing was about stopping illegal immigration. But with this executive order, he's stopping legal immigration. It's never been about just stopping undocumented people from coming in or deporting people that don't follow the rules. These are the people who are following the rules he's trying to stop from coming into the United States.
Sarah, I'm interested, as somebody has ran for Congress yourself there, shout out to the good people of Rockford, Illinois, who got the chance to vote for you when you ran against the Republican Adam Kinzinger. I'm curious what the down ballot situation is looking like for congressional races with all of this going on, with Donald Trump's continuing attacks on immigrants, but also we've been talking about the growing frustration of Americans and his response. Would that mean something different for you running against the Kinzinger of the world in 2020 compared to where it was in 2018 when you last ran?
That's an excellent question, and I think it's all going to come down to early voting. If you look at what just happened right across the border, 15 miles from Rockford in Wisconsin, Democrats won in the primary, right? Those voters who were standing in line, risking their lives to vote, they voted Democrat. So I think 2020 will be a much different election year for Democrats, because Democrats, I think, are better at early voting. So, I'm not sure about Illinois' 16th congressional district, because it is very Republican, and the Republicans tend to be the ones who vote here. I think early voting is going to be key in voting by mail. So it depends on if we make that easier or if we don't.
But then I guess looking around there, you're talking about how it's a more Republican congressional district, and obviously I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, which is part of that area, but not as Republican, I guess, as the rest of the district there. Looking around, are people saying, wait a second, what's this Donald Trump guy been saying here? Is there a sea shift changing? I mean, there also has to be some type of frustration towards the president to either mute some of those Republican votes, because we're not seeing many Democrats energizing the votes in many ways. So are people going to go turn out and vote by mail or vote early for Democrats is one question. But I'm more curious, are you seeing a dampening or a deceleration of support for Donald Trump over the last month?
I don't know. I've been practicing social distancing very strongly. So I haven't been talking to a lot of people. And then, of course, most of my people on social media tend to lean left. So I don't know, but maybe that's why Trump issued this executive order to try and soothe his base. And immigration always whipped up, never fails. So we'll see. Other thing that I think is interesting is how he's encouraged his supporters to go out and protest about masks. Michigan, Cincinnati, everywhere against the stay-at-home orders. Thereby spread and support this invisible enemy. So we'll see how that plays out. Yeah. Understanding some of the areas where there have been protests, increased rates of COVID-19 infections.
Yeah. Let me get into the weeds real quick here, Sarah. We just have a couple minutes left with you, and I did want your thoughts on this. This latest news here is more than 1 million U.S. citizens in states as far as California and Pennsylvania, get this, have been blocked from receiving stimulus checks because they are married to immigrants who don't have Social Security numbers. The government's CARES Act offers $1,200 to Americans earning up to $75,000 if you have a Social Security number, and will give you up to $500 per child. But the act excludes millions of tax-paying immigrants who do not have legal status, and it also blocks, more curiously, U.S. citizens if they file a joint tax return with a spouse who does not have a Social Security number. So, wait, what, Sarah? It means basically if you're an American with a Social Security number, but if you're married to somebody without one, you somehow are no longer entitled to these paychecks for Americans?
So weird.
That's right. And this is just another way the administration is punishing people who are following the rules. This administration has never been about rule of law. So it's moral and it's unfair. People who don't have a Social Security number but who have earned income in the U.S., the IRS allows them to file taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number. And they pay billions and billions of dollars every year in taxes and filing their returns. But this administration and the Republicans in Congress have decided to punish them for doing the right thing and contributing to this country by denying them this stimulus relief.
Yeah, and people know people that are connected to the supply chains and to work and communities, all people that are going to be impacted by this. I just feel like Donald Trump's digging his own grave, maybe a heavy metaphor for the times. But with that, Sarah, we are out of time. That was immigration attorney at Dady Law Group, Sarah Dady. Sarah, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Jamarl. It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamarl, after this minute break, we come back with another hour of Political Misfits. I'm excited. The one and only David Swanson will be with us. We're going to be talking about why America is so sick and how it can be cured. We'll also have our weekly Revelations segment this week looking at the strange and bizarre world of American leftism. Jamarl, you have to walk me through that. I don't understand them. We'll later end the show talking about some critical news from the meat industry, that and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's keep this momentum going. We have lots to cover over the next hour, including our weekly Revelation segment. As always, your calls and tweets are appreciated. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. So, Bob, you might not have known this, you might not even believe me, but believe it or not, there's still an election taking place right now. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has basically sucked all the air out of the room, with Biden struggling to demonstrate any real presence in this crisis. The latest NBC Wall Street Journal poll found 26% of people trust Joe Biden on the COVID-19 crisis compared to 36% for Trump. To put this in perspective, Trump has pushed a drug for months that has literally gotten people killed. Trump has refused to get the supplies necessary, the vaccines necessary to ensure that the people in the population was covered, and even refused to ensure that the population was not incentivized to go out into the public to make themselves ill further. And yet, when you ask the public, Trump gets a higher regard than Biden. That said, it's not all bad news for one presumptive Democratic nominee. With the endorsements over the next weekend of Obama, Warren, and one Bernard Sanders, I'm no longer calling him Bernie, that's too formal, or that's too informal now, Biden has gained nearly 10 points in favorability. Assume for the moment that Joe Biden wins in November. What should we expect from a Joe Biden administration, especially in regards to foreign policy? To discuss, we're joined by David Swanson, activist, journalist, radio host, and author of the book, Curbing Exceptionalism. David, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, good to be here.
Hi, good to be here. So, Joe Biden spent this election hugging Obama for basically all of the roses, while at the same token kicking him for all of the thorns, meaning in the time frame that Joe Biden was in the administration. Do we have any idea what a Joe Biden foreign policy would even look like?
Well, I think it would be catastrophic, somewhat like Trump's and Obama's and those before them. I mean, this is a guy who, yes, his whole shtick is I'm not Trump and I hung out with Obama, but he agrees with Trump rather than Obama on sanctions on Iran, rather than going back to the deal with Iran. He is someone who, voted for the war on Iraq and didn't just vote for the war on Iraq, but was in charge of the committee hearings and made sure no voices could be heard that were against the war on Iraq while he was pushing all the laughable lies that we pretended were exposed later to get the war on Iraq started. I mentioned that out of the many, many, many wars that Joe Biden has supported, I'm not aware of any he's taken a stand against, because it used to be disqualifying, including for Joe Biden.
Democrats didn't want to look weak.
Be president. And so you get these, insider, books out of the White House claiming Biden was the less militaristic voice than Hillary Clinton in the Obama White House. Well, that's a very low bar. And this is, somebody who's just pushing militarism and hostility. And when Trump, starts blaming China because he can't blame the immigrants from south of the border any more than he already has, and the blame's all falling on himself. What does Biden do? He doesn't point out that Trump is blaming China to distract. He accuses Trump of being too soft on China and claims that he can blame China more.
That is true. David, I want to go back to the JCPOA for the moment, because you're absolutely right. And I thought that was one of the weirdest responses. Donald Trump pulls out of the JCPOA. Joe Biden was in the administration that passed the JCPOA. Iran was living up to the tenets of the JCPOA. When Trump pulled out, every Democrat bellyached that, oh my God, Trump is going to bring us to the brink of war. You finally get to a position where they ask Joe Biden about it, and Joe Biden is dicey on whether or not he wants to pull back sanctions. Does he not know that he was in the administration that passed the JCPOA and that he is supposed to be for backing this deal as opposed to keeping the sanctions with Iran?
I think he knows that. I think he also knows that people on the left, that is anyone with any sort of interest in decency in domestic or foreign policy, any sense of sanity or civilization or human sustainability and survivability on this planet, is likely to, as in over the past decades, to vote for him no matter what he does. All he has to do is the "I'm not Trump" bit, and he's got them. He doesn't have to add the "I hung out with Obama" part. That was for the primaries, right? So, he knows what he has to do and what he doesn't have to do. And my position is deny him your vote so that he and the Democratic Party begin to understand that they have to do something to earn it. But as of now, there's not a huge movement publicly taking that stand. And remember, these are sanctions that Madeleine Albright, of all people, has turned against. I mean, the incarnation of evil sanction advocacy, the woman who said killing 500,000 children is worth it, and nobody even asked what it was. She's against the sanctions on Iran as pure cruelty, serving no other purpose than sadistic cruelty. And Biden isn't. This is who Biden is.
I've been screaming this position for like a year. So I am so glad that other learned people have come to this exact same position. You might have already been here. But after 2020, my clarity on this was pretty straightforward because I came to the exact same conclusion that you did. How do you ever get the Democratic Party, for that matter, any leverage in the political space if you continuously fold yourself into the party structure? I mean, this has been going on for like half of a century. And at no point does the left look at this and say, hey, maybe this is not working. Ultimately, if you're trying to get any level of credibility in the political process where you can influence and leverage, your ability is basically accountability and allowing them or being able to make them lose. Am I wrong on that? I mean, basically, that's what the Democratic Party did this election around. They were more willing to beat Sanders as opposed to trying to beat Trump. Am I misunderstanding that?
I have two positions. One is that we're too obsessed with elections and we need to talk about something else, but I've given up on that, decades ago. You have to talk about elections. Nobody wants to talk about anything else. My other is in agreement with you. If you want to get the Democratic Party or any elected officials or candidates to listen to you, you have to have some power over them. You have to persuade them that they need to listen to you. And so you watch a video of Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC being paid to say, you shouldn't vote for the candidate everybody likes, you should vote for the candidate who has a chance to win, as if those are two different things, this sort of push-polling nonsense that the corporate media does. And then you look at a video from years ago of Lawrence O'Donnell speaking without being paid what to think, and he says, look, I worked in the Democratic Party. They ignore the progressives. If the progressives ever want them to pay attention, they're going to have to deny them their vote and say you can only have our vote at a certain price. Otherwise, they'll never listen. Which is the more accurate video, right? I mean, I read Jeremy Scahill's article today, or maybe it was yesterday, on, should you vote for Biden or not? And it's, quite lengthy. And Jeremy is not only a wonderful person, but a terrific journalist. But he never gets around to saying what you should do. But he treats voting for Biden as a strategic choice and voting against Biden as something that you should be respectful to those poor people who do that because they're angry. But he doesn't treat it as a strategy of any sort. Right? My position is it's a strategic move. It's a cold, calculated, I'm not an over-emotional imbecile. It's a strategic choice to vote against Biden and Trump.
Yeah, I live here in the District of Washington, D.C., a territory of the great United States where my vote doesn't matter because I don't get representation in the Congress, so I'm not represented here. We do get a few electoral votes we get to throw to the president, David. And so I'm kind of always curious, then where do people find that power? If electoral politics is where political, social, and economic movements go to die, then how do we break from that fix we have on electoral presidential power? I mean, for me, right now in this pandemic, obviously the federal government matters, but what is your local government doing? And that really, for me, impacts my life much more than whatever the president's going to do. If that bar makes too much noise, next to my house that's open until 2 a.m. Who gets that to turn down? Not the president, your local elected official. If you don't like dogs off of leashes, who makes that agreement? That's your local elected officials. Who does zoning in your neighborhood? Local elected officials. For me, my life is much more determined on the local elected officials around me that surely fit into a much larger structure. But David, I think there also needs to be a need and focus to organize people's neighbors if we're ever going to have this larger momentum shift from the left. I feel like Bernie Sanders, if anything, was the Hail Mary approach. Let's see if we can get Bernie Sanders in there somehow. But he dropped the ball. We didn't get the touchdown. And now it goes to decentralizing the central government and building power between people at a hyper-local level. But where does that start? Does that start with politics? Does that start with culture? Does that start with economics?
Well, I think cultural change, educational work, and activist work influence politics as much as the other way around. I think even much more so. And exactly how you do it during a time of sheltering in place and quarantining is, in the process of being figured out. World Beyond War, we're doing countless webinars and Zoom events and online activities and online courses. But we have to, understand that women didn't vote themselves the right to vote. It was a popular movement that used nonviolent civil disobedient actions, and this is, the fundamental way in which most things change. Now, we need to use elections to the extent we can, even in completely broken systems, but more so in local and regional systems that aren't yet completely broken, and we need more power locally in politics and globally in politics. We ought to have global decisions happening now. We ought to have global cooperation on trying to find the best practices and possible cures for disease epidemics. But, we don't. Part of that has to be done at the national level. Part of it has to be done by local and global entities demanding power.
But the demand for power starts with accountability, right? And I don't mean this in the context of parties. I just mean this in the context of a society that gets to the point of realizing that as human beings, they have value, and there are some levels to which they're not willing to accept. Meaning the race to the bottom that we have in our politics, where for the Democrats, any blue would do, where they would literally argue least worse and use that as this kind of basis of trying to get people or shame people into voting for their candidate. I guess I'm making the point that outside of political structure, people coming together under this notion of policy saying these are the policies that we're willing to accept or you don't get our support. And my argument is that basically whether you're a Republican, an independent, you may be a Republican and still care about Medicare for all because you grew up not having access to health care. Like, if you untether the party, you untether a lot of symbolism that are associated, that are linked or tethered to the party structure in people's mind and their cognitive processes. What do you think of that in regards to trying to get something accomplished? Because I would make the case that at some point, you gain legitimacy when you have millions of people coming together under that level of solidarity. And those people can become something else, meaning they don't necessarily have to stay with just being able to make somebody lose. They may actually be able to organize into taking political power in and of itself.
The U.S. system was set up without any mention of parties, but it was set up as a winner-take-all system, which was very likely to develop two big parties that would be difficult to challenge. But that is exacerbated by structures that are absolutely unnecessary and peripheral to such a system, including the incredible financial power given to these two parties, the control over the debates and the ballots, and the scheduling and the communication of the election that's given to these two parties, that could all be taken away. The cleaning the money out of the system would clean the money out of the two parties, opening ballot access, creating free and fair media and public financing of elections. You would still have two big parties, but you would have much greater opportunity for third parties, fourth parties, independent candidates without parties to compete in these elections. So we need the basic, we need to get rid of legalized bribery. We need to get verifiable vote counting, and we need to get as verifiable as possible voting by mail counting at the moment. But I think there are other options of going to a parliamentary system, of getting ranked choice voting in elections, etc. But the basic steps of reforming the corruption are the first step, the absolutely necessary and possibly sufficient step that has to be taken. Because right now you've got a system where one party can be as awful as it pleases, and the other party won't impeach or remove its leader, no matter what he does, unless it's somehow bizarrely connected to Russia and Ukraine. And you see that since that impeachment, with the understanding that there won't be another one, has just escalated everything awful he was doing before.
I want to give a shout out to the violent women who push back in civil disobedience. Our producer kind of made the point that actually women also use violent civil disobedience. Shout out to the violent disobedient women. Right on. I do want to jump to China for the moment. So I want to play a campaign ad that Joe Biden made on Trump. And this is the xenophobic ad that I think you alluded to earlier. Let's let the audience hear it. Joe Biden, xenophobic ad. Let's play the clip.
That Trump had left us unprepared for a pandemic. Then Biden told Trump he should insist on having American health experts on the ground in China.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on.
But Trump rolled over for the Chinese. He took their word for it.
The president tweeted, China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency.
China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard, and I think it's going to all work out fine.
Trump praised the Chinese 15 times in January and February as the coronavirus spread across the world.
It's a tough situation. I think they're doing a very good job.
Are you concerned about its potential impact on the global economy?
I think that China will do a very good job.
Trump never got a CDC team on the ground in China. And the travel ban he brags about? Trump let in 40,000 travelers from China into America after he signed.
15 times. He praised the Chinese 50 times. And I love that part where they're like, we're going to be in your country. Joe Biden at times didn't even know where he was, let alone talking about being in somebody else's country. Now, my perspective of this changed with numbers that came out recently by Pew Research. So I'm just going to read a few of these. Across the demographic groups, negative views of China abound. Roughly 6 in 10 Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents have unfavorable views of China, as roughly as 7 in 10 Republicans and Republican-leaning independents. That's an astonishingly high number. About 9 in 10 U.S. adults see China as power and influence as a threat, including 62% that call it a major threat. Now, this is somewhat unhinged. Now, it's not that I think China is love and light any more than any other country is love and light, but the United States has 800 military bases around the world, including base in Taiwan and Japan that is specifically to target China. It's such a bizarre perspective that the American public has on this stuff. We invade countries left and right. We've been running shadow wars and toppling governments. And yet the American public will come out and say this. Now, I understand it to some degree now in the way that Joe Biden has been attacking China and Trump has been attacking China, because from their standpoint, they see these numbers just like I do, right? What does this mean for the foreign policy coming forward under somebody like a Joe Biden administration when it's willing to feed into this kind of xenophobic red meat in order to attack Trump?
Well, I couldn't agree more, except for the use of the word we for the U.S. military, and with whatever was meant by support for violent civil disobedient women. I have no idea.
I'm joking on that one. It's my producer kind of made the point that women also engaged in violent civil disobedience. I was just teasing. I was joking. I'm sorry. Ignore that part.
What? When? Where? Well, how?
With women's suffrage, I think they were talking about the women's suffrage movement. There was different cultural movements as well as there was direct disobedience taking place.
Well, go look at how much longer it took women in England to get the right to vote using more violence, and how much faster women got it in the United States using nonviolence quite skillfully. In any case, the China ad is a real problem, and the ads from super PACs supporting Biden are real problems, and they use words like the Chinese, while Chinese Americans are being subjected to that bigotry. And you look at, if you go to fair.org, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, they have a good report on how the corporate media has been treating in the U.S. These ads from Biden with complete acceptance, no challenge to the xenophobia, not even to the slight degree that they challenge it when it comes from Trump. And in China, for it's a horrible government, as most of them are, but you don't improve relations with lies and attacks and bigotry. I mean, China has sent emergency supplies to the United States during this crisis. Some of them on the New England Patriots airplane, which has got to just blow the minds of the Patriots trying to figure out what's good and what's evil. But why not some gratitude for that, and some recognition that the United States is finally accepting, in some cases, aid from other countries? I mean, I'm old enough to remember disasters like Hurricane Katrina, where the United States was turning down foreign aid because it was too proud to allow anyone to help its citizens. And in that same polling that you cited, you got 90% of people in the United States declaring China to be a threat. China's power and influence are a threat, which is war talk. And you got Biden in, I think, that last debate saying, we need to challenge China not with war, but by sending 60% of our Navy over to China. Well, how is that not war? What are you threatening China with 60% of your Navy for, if not war? It's madness, and it's he's not Trump is just not good enough. That kind of madness.
Yeah, the moment that will always stick out in my head of many moments of why I'm not a Democrat is from the Democratic Convention in 2016, when anti-war protesters were at that convention and they started chanting peace messages, anti-war messages, and they got drowned out by the crowd chanting USA, USA. And I think the next day it happened again, and there was accusations that the organizers, the Democratic Party, had basically pumped sound into the convention center to drown those people out. And in the last 4 years, David, it's basically meant that the Democratic Party has even gone further where it was when it comes to a militaristic view. I mean, you have Adam Schiff is the liberal hero of the Congress of the Democratic Party out there on all of this Russiagate stuff. He, too, voted for every war, one of the major promoters of FISA, major promoters of U.S. imperialism. And these are the faces of the party. Bernie Sanders was never great on foreign policy, and he surely isn't the face of this party anymore. There's no one on this party's upper echelon of folks that have anyway articulated and spoken out against wars. And throughout all of the debates, we saw the media basically be complicit and push anybody saying anything nice about anywhere else in the world was instantly hand slapped and attacked for that.
They've normalized extreme militarism. They've normalized murder by robot airplane. They've normalized opposition to global peace efforts, including the global ceasefire, where the United States, and with perhaps Russia in second place, are the big foot draggers on trying to get a global ceasefire put in place. You've got the liberals, the Democrats in Congress, ready to expand draft registration to include young women, to force 18-year-old women in the United States to register to be forced against their will to fight and die in wars for oil profits or whatever these wars are for, as a matter of equal rights, as fairness to women. They don't want to be deprived of the privilege of being forced against their will into these wars. And they've got a bill now in Congress to do this, together with boosting JROTC and military recruitment, and wrapped and packaged in all these nonviolent, actual volunteer Peace Corps and AmeriCorps and so forth, as if being forced into war is just another voluntary humanitarian service. And this has got bipartisan support, whereas there's another bill to abolish the selective service, so you're not unfair to women because you don't make the men sign up anymore either, which would be the decent, modern thing to do. And that's going nowhere. So we have a real problem with bipartisan acceptance of militarism, and Russiagate was a huge part of increasing that on the Democratic side.
Yeah, and it starts young too, Jamarl. I mean, that's the thing in the United States that we forget. There's over 500,000 students in the United States in the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. 3,000 JROTC units operating in every state. So basically at schools across this country, there are 500,000 students learning on how to be the future leaders of the U.S. militaristic machine. And you talk about something like the Peace Corps, some 9,000 members at any given time, and less than 300,000 total people have participated in a global program to spread peace. But we have 500,000 people in our schools learning every day about militarism and about the Army, Jamarl. So at a very young age, and this is why we need to push back when people always use the phrase, well, the young people will carry the way and the young enlightened progressives, and if it's just a younger generation. But if we're indoctrinating the younger generation at very young ages into believing this stuff, they're going to be in the exact same position as their parents, and we need to be much more honest about that.
That's true, by the way. I'm curious, David, which do you think has more influence, art or, in this case, just the blunt militarism in regards to our society? I mean, we spend like $1 trillion on the military. We have like 800 military bases all around the world. We give these sweeping tributes in regards to the way we worship the troops, while not necessarily, making sure that caring for those troops by keeping them here in the United States and seeing to their needs as human beings. Is this one of those things where this is kind of a feedback mechanism between art and propaganda that kind of, I guess, influences this particular behavior? And if so, how do we ever win this if that kind of hall of mirrors persists itself?
It's not actually that hard to turn people around by talking with them for an hour or so. I mean, yesterday I spoke with a high school class in Washington, D.C. via Zoom, of course, as I've often done in person or via Zoom. And I asked them at the very beginning, as I always do you think wars are never justified, or sometimes some wars could be justified? And, random sampling of the U.S. population, you get almost nobody saying war is never justified. A class that's already inclined to invite me to speak to it, you get about half of them. But after an hour of talking with them, you get all of them to say war is never justified. And you do it by just telling them a few things they've never heard. They've been hit by $1 billion a year marketing campaign from the U.S. military that pays professional sports teams to worship the military, that buys race cars, that puts up billboards, that sends out recruiters. It's hard to compete with that. And if you talk, and of course they're just saturated with a culture that glorifies World War II. And so you talk to them about some of the myths around World War II, about some of the myths around current wars, about the unique U.S. role in war making and weapons dealing, and how the role it could play in reversing that, about the great lengths the U.S. government has gone to get into wars. They're not this inevitable thing that people have tried to avoid, and I don't know how long the shift lasts, but if you just talk to them for an hour, they're all with you. So the question is, where do we come up with the television network or the means of talking with every young person for an hour? That's the part I haven't figured out.
Well, shout out to the new K-drama Crash Landing on You, David. We reviewed that yesterday on our show, but it basically shows North and South Koreans through a series of events being forced to meet one another, to see one another, and breaks down so many of these stereotypes that we hold of other people around the world. I highly recommend it to anyone that didn't get to hear us talk about it yesterday to check that out on Netflix. But David, that's your point, as we have a few minutes left here, is that we need these cross-cultural moments for people to see others outside of ourselves. And that's what's so remarkable, is within a half hour, an hour, that can be broken down. My mom tells me a story in the 60s, how she saw a video come out from the Soviet Union showing young people there doing gymnastics. And all of a sudden, within seconds, she said, wait a second, they're just like me. I too love gymnastics. These aren't just this terrifying evil monster that I'm being told about. And so it is this intense need for us to interconnect and share culture to be able to move past a lot of this aggression and fear that we do have that leads to so much violence.
I agree. It's very good advice to talk with people that you don't agree with and to talk with people who are far away, and in particular to talk with people who are in the targeted nations of your government's militaries. Talk with some Chinese and Russians and Iranians and North Koreans and South Koreans, and it makes a world of difference. And as long as we're meeting everybody through our computer screens on Zoom and Skype and so forth anyway, it's exactly as easy to, well, it's almost as easy. I mean, you aren't allowed to have Zoom in Iran, but you can get around that. It's virtually as easy to talk with people who are thousands and thousands of miles away, and it's much more informative and educational and important to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. Excellent points all around. We're out of time, unfortunately, there with the wonderful David Swanson. David, where can people find more of your work online?
Well, I'm at davidswanson.org. I also work at rootsaction.org, and a lot of what I've been talking about here is related to worldbeyondwar.org.
Fantastic. After the break here, we'll take the look at the strange and mystical world of America's Democratic Party. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with Bob Schlehuber, my co-host. Let's get ready to go against the grain. You guys can always call at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Oh, also, please like and share the video if you dig what we are putting down. So, COVID-19 pandemic has revealed in startling terms the depravity of our political class and the level of contempt to which they hold the American public. I was originally going to do a discussion on physics related to the double slit experiment, but I have to be honest, something was bugging me over the course of the last few weeks that I kind of want to discuss as a revelation, because to some degree it is a profound and a stunning revelation. In the Star Trek universe, even as technology on the planet expanded, the various countries and the political factions were still at each other's throats. There was a third world war, but it wasn't until we got to the point where our planet was literally on the brink of collapse that Earth finally came together as one. But it took the planet literally getting to the brink of collapse, meaning it took an emergency to prioritize the thinking of humanity. But at the very least, humanity was at a point where they were rational enough to prioritize humanity. My producer loves my Star Trek references, so that one is for her. It's always an open question to me how craven people can be. Now, what I mean by that is, under normal circumstances where politics is somewhat fluid and you don't necessarily have these extremes going on, there's a certain amount of leeway that people take in the political space. This is no different than the way most people behave in their lives, meaning under normal circumstances you may take certain liberties, but when there's an emergency or crisis or when something is on the line, for the most part, you prioritize the things that you think are most important. I'm making the point that our political class is the same way. The catch becomes, what happens in the midst of a crisis? And does this level of tone deafness to the public itself persist even in the middle of a crisis? Well, we have the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic. And so if nothing else, we get the ability to actually answer that question by comparing what a rational government would do versus what our population is doing. Now, my hypothesis on this is that no, they're not going to change. And not only not going to change, they're not going to see to the interests of the public, because there's been no accountability in the political process for so long that it's just old hat at this point. Right now, you have Joe Biden, who's running for office. Joe Biden is running on empathy and all of these other guidelines. However, Joe Biden was perfectly willing to send people to Wisconsin to potentially get ill and die. The largest constituency of people, meaning disproportionately, were African Americans, the exact same contingent that Joe Biden was relying on to get elected. It didn't matter to Joe Biden one iota to send those people to potentially their deaths as long as it got him elected. Elections are contrived. That election could have been 2 months, 3 months later. It wouldn't matter one iota. Joe Biden just wanted to finish that election up as was willing to basically put lives on the line in order to do so. The person who's trying to become Joe Biden's running mate, one Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren on the debate stage landed one of the most critical, crucial, brutal blows, maybe outside of maybe Tulsi Gabbard, on one Bloomberg, making the point of wrapping him in knots on this notion of NDAs and the women who he effectively load under those NDAs. Well, Warren kept asking, are you going to release the women? Are you going to release the women? Are you going to release the women? And you would imagine after a while, that looks pretty bad that a billionaire is effectively using his wealth and lawyers to tie women in knots so they can't speak out about abuse. Warren talks to Chris Matthews. Chris Matthews goes after and says, hey, do you really believe Bloomberg is that bad? Warren says, I believe the woman. Now, Chris Matthews got in trouble for this because he kept going after her, and she kept saying, I believe the woman, I believe the woman, I believe the woman. It's amazing how strong and how hard she's fighting for that VP spot in the way that she disbelieves the woman now who's making claims against that same Joe Biden that was perfectly willing for all of those people to take the axe in order to get him over the finish line. Same thing with Donald Trump. Compare for the moment the society that we're in, this kind of perfect storm society. You have Americans who have, 22 million jobs that are lost. 43% of the population either have lost their jobs or, for the most part, have lost income. You have around 10 million people that have lost their health care because those health care is tethered to their jobs. You have a health insurance industry that, for the most part, is going to use this thing to make profits, but people still have to pay those bills even in the middle of a pandemic. You have most people who don't have $500 in the bank. I'm making the point it is a perfect storm in the United States. And yet, the thing that the government cares about the most is what? $1,200 to the American population while they give trillions to the corporate class. I'm making the very basic point here that the Trump administration, even in the middle of a pandemic, is taking a cynical political approach to basically starve the population, using their vulnerability to force that population into taking the political tack that they want, meaning to try to get those states to open up early. This will literally get people killed. Fauci himself made the point that this will backfire. Why? Because every scientist, epidemiologist, every doctor, every nurse, all of these people know the exact same truth that social distancing is the thing that will deal with the ills of this particular virus. In this very specific case, though, what does Trump do? He gives $1,200, knowing that with all of these people losing their jobs and with all of these people without a social safety net, what are these people to do? Yes, you have some lunatics, but I'm talking about what are just decent people to do in a situation where they've been abandoned by their government. Trump, in this case, is being extraordinarily cynical and is perfectly okay with people dying in order to push the agenda of 1%. Fox News turns around and backs up Trump on this, creating a groundswell of argumentation to legitimize the fact that Trump is going to get a lot of people killed. Let's hear Laura Ingraham make her basic argument about the coronavirus.
The left doesn't have any intention of letting society return to normal. They never liked the old normal. Remember, Trump was elected during the old normal days. Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court during the old normal. And the Russia hoax collapsed during the normal days. Now those who've been frustrated that America hasn't evolved fast enough to progressive ends are using this crisis to change society, they hope. As Andrew Cuomo said, to remake it and to reimagine it. And right now, to frank assessment, they're winning. Millions are out of work and dependent on a government rescue. Dr. Fauci is focusing only on the virus, not, of course, on the broader American life that must go on before the nation itself flatlines.
It's his job. He's a doctor. It is his job to care about the life of these various people. Are you kidding me? Fauci's job, and specialists and scientists and everything else, is to cut down the number of people who are transmitting this virus. That is literally his job. You are out here basically attacking Fauci because he's not okay with a certain degree of loss of life in order to get the economy up and running so your owners can make more profits. No, it's not an issue of the government not doing enough or the government doing too much. The issue is the government hasn't done enough. You should have a situation just of common sense. If a government cares about the well-being of its society, that government will see to it that that society stays in the house. Look at what other countries were doing. In Europe, 80% of the revenue, bolstering some of the small businesses so those businesses don't go out of business, or supporting those businesses when those businesses keep their employees on. You had countries that were seeing directly to the needs of the people. Why? To keep those people at home and to get rid of the incentives that will push those people to go out and agitate, to go back into a work situation where they will potentially die. I mean, let's put this in perspective. You have meatpacking plants with 300 people that got ill. You have Amazon warehouses with all of these people getting ill. The Wisconsin election where they were tracking various people, or at the very least a blip that went up in Wisconsin after the election. Kentucky showing a blip of going up after those people going out to protest. The actions that our administrations are going through are utterly murderous. And they're doing it for political ends. And that's not just the Trump administration. That's not just the Democratic Party. That's across the board in the political space. Bob, that should be a revelation. They don't care about you. And the degree to which they don't care about you is utterly and entirely depraved. And that's not one party, that's both. Because the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives, they could be knocking this out the park. They can do whatever they want. They have the House. They could pass legislation to go in contrast with what Trump is doing, but they're not doing that. In a situation where if these guys really, really cared about something other than just trying to get Trump out of office, this will be their moment. This will be the thing that they will be taking advantage of. Laura Ingraham is nonsensical.
I guess I don't know what you're. I don't know. I guess I'm not exactly sure what you were expecting. I think this revelation for many people, it goes back quite a while to the Democratic Party. I mean, many people 40 years ago, this corporate culture and corporate capture of both of America's parties. I mean, you read all these books about how Coca-Cola and the big U.S. military companies donate equally to both parties because no matter who wins, then we basically have control over them. And then both parties are playing to these big financiers of their political processes. I mean, I hear you saying about Joe Biden wanting to have this election there in Wisconsin. I think it's the Democratic Party that really needs to be held accountable, and people need to continue to point fingers at them. It wasn't as shocking of a steal of the election that happened in 2016, but in 2020, the Democratic Party put up everything it could against Bernie Sanders. Do we remember when Troy Price, the now fired Iowa state director for the Democratic Party, that's where the Bernie Sanders momentum really took a huge hit. Pete Buttigieg, Jamarl, somehow comes out the victor of a race he didn't even get more votes in. Somehow they took 5 days to get the election results out in part, and then took another 2 weeks to ever certify them. And I'm pretty sure we've never actually even certified those Iowa votes. Democratic Party.
We never did. And in
so
fact,
what's the
to make
Democratic
it worse,
Party?
Bob, if you remember, those votes were dripped out for when Buttigieg did the town hall. They immediately came out with the numbers. like it was so over the top.
People sent out the email, I won, all of that stuff, and it basically adds up to this. Again, any insurgent campaign from the outside has no space in American politics, and people have been running up against this wall and completely crushed in silence. I think of somebody like a David Swanson, who we just had on, worked with Dennis Kucinich in his political run in 2008, and the party did everything it could to slowly raise the limit that you had to qualify for the different debates, simply based on how much Kucinich had. If Kucinich had 3.8%, you needed 3.9% to have qualified, and you see it close and up personal when you're actually involved in these processes. And we talk about Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren had the opportunity to endorse Richard Cadre, the former Consumer Bureau chief there of the agency. She helped formed there with her good friend Joe Biden, who also took credit for it. But since I guess they're buddies now, they can share credit. But she endorses cadre over endorsing a Dennis Kucinich, who has policies much more in line with the American left of the Bernie Sanders, that Elizabeth Warren then 2 years later says, I agree with these policies, even though 2 years ago you can look and see that I endorsed the other guy who didn't support these things, Jamarl. So the more we see it and the more it happens, it just gets worse and worse for the Democratic Party. But I guess they just hope America has insomnia, has short-term memories. They don't sleep very much. They drink too much coffee and care a lot about guns and abortion, that they don't have to introduce any policies that have any consequence or meaning, and they can continue to do what they're doing to the American people.
I think it's more distressing than that, if I'm being honest. Because think about for the moment, I understand you can take a cynical look at politics, and typically, we do. I think that's typically the right perspective. But, at the end of the day, you would hope that there's some bottom level where the public trust would matter. Where it's not so shameless and not so bottom barrel where it doesn't matter what is taking place. The world could be coming to an end and they would still be gripping for the last 3 pennies on the board. Well, that seems to be where we are. It doesn't seem to be a bottom level to the level of depravity that these guys are willing to engage in. And by the way, this goes into the whole UFO conversation with why do some people believe that people who are like this and willing to do this in the middle of a pandemic where you're going to get a large loss of life, that new technology and everything else is going to be used to make this a new, better society. I don't see it. These are the people who are in power. And this is what they're willing to do, even knowing that it's going to get a lot of people killed. Yeah.
I'm curious looking forward here. I'm curious looking forward here over the next months and stuff. And again, so much of this all feels like the Dr. King quote, we're integrating people into a burning school or a burning house, where you're asking a capitalistic system, as you mentioned, that gives no leeway whatsoever to any alternative plans and will continue to eat itself as it dies, slowly yet surely. But there is no answer within it for me. So no matter what is proposed in Congress right now, no matter what is put out there by Donald Trump, whatever the Democrats are fighting for within this system, it will never actually reach the degrees in which it would transform this country and the economic system. And so we're constantly going to be fighting for those $1,200 checks once every 6 months, and then eventually having long food lines and other crises across this country.
I can agree with that. I do agree with you on that. I don't think the solution comes through the political process. It's more so, I guess I'm looking at it as, the government is the buyer of last resort. And in a situation where the economy hits the skids and people no longer have the ability to provide for themselves, you would expect the governmental edifice, just like it does in all of these other European countries, to step in. And the fact that not only was he not willing to do that, but while the house was on fire, to basically loot the place, that's some cynical politics that these guys are willing to engage in. I guess I don't believe that there are going to be answers within context of the capitalist system. I do believe in the middle of an emergency, you should look out for the best interest of the public. So.
That sounds fair to me. Jamarl, I want to ask you one more future revelations question. I think maybe it would deserve its own segment. It's been interesting hearing, and somebody that likes talking about history a lot, been interesting hearing the comparisons of this moment right now, this COVID-19 pandemic. You've heard, this is like 9/11 and people comparing death tolls. Some people talk about the 1917 and 1918 flu influenza that we had. People sometimes compare it to the Great Depression, others the Great Recession. Obviously, it's its own unique thing, but I'm curious when you hear these historical comparisons, if it's starting to show itself in any relation where we can study history.
So, kind of. I mean, if you're looking at it, it depends on the lens you're looking at it, right? If you're looking at it from the lens of economics, then you may see something like the Great Depression, and you can kind of make comparisons in regards to having an FDR figure that can pick up the pieces and kind of run with it. That's what I mean when I say knock it out of the park. You have a crisis and then having something to kind of activate that crisis in order to get to your particular policy agenda. But that's looking at it through an economic lens. If you're looking at it through the lens of, let's say, viral or infectious disease, then yeah, Spanish flu makes sense, especially in the sense of places that decided to open early in comparison to places that decided not to do that. So, between California and Los Angeles, for example, one opens early, one decides to close later, and that one ends up taking a higher death toll than the other location. But you can see these parallels, and they're there. Where you can kind of look over history, it's oh wow, when they opened early, all of those people died. Let's not do that. But for whatever reason, that stuff doesn't apply in the political space. It's the weirdest thing in the world to me.
Well, You're asking for history to apply
Yeah,
to America, Jamal. We don't do history. This is America. Jamal, with that, we got to take a quick break. That was our weekly revelations segment. After the break, watch out, meat lovers. Our producer, Michelle Whitty, has a note for you. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Political Misfits?
Political Misfits who?
Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik?
Not ringing a bell, sorry.
News, politics, culture, cutting through the red and blue spin to get to the real story? From noon to 2 p.m. Eastern at 105.5 in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, it's Bob and Jamarl. Of course, come on in.
Aren't you glad you didn't say MSNBC?
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
On Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We bring our show here to its close over the next 10 minutes. Stay tuned on Radio Sputnik. You have a great lineup ahead of you. By Any Means Necessary is next, followed by Loud and Clear and the Critical Hour. All of that and more. Tune in daily, 105.5 FM here in Washington, D.C. Jamarl, I get the privilege today to deliver the following note from our fantastic producer, Michelle Whitty. I'll read it now, but prepare yourself, meat lovers. Michelle is at her wit's end. Jamarl, Michelle writes, "Hey, Misfits, do you like slaughtering tens of thousands of animals at a time? Ha, 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 ha. If you eat meat, of course you do. Tragically, because the COVID-19 pandemic has really slashed the demand for a lot of products, or at least bulk purchases of a lot of products, industrial farmers are now in a position of torturing and killing animals that they can't even make money on and that you can't even eat. Such a bummer." One contract egg farmer in Minnesota offers a window into what's happening. He told the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that Daybreak Foods, the company that actually owned the chickens he was contracted to house and raise, alerted him suddenly that the animals were no longer wanted. A crew showed up the next morning to pump carbon dioxide into the chicken's house and gas the creatures. The farmer said the chickens were supposed to be laying eggs until the fall, but one of their main destinations, a nearby egg plant, shut down temporarily and laid off 300 workers, and there wasn't anywhere else for the eggs to be sold quickly and easily profitable, that is. You might have noticed that eggs are in high demand and egg prices have gone up, but a lot of American eggs are designed to go to, quote, fluid egg plants, not retail stores. The Star-Tribune explains the situation like this. Much of the egg production system is built to provide fluid eggs to food service companies, and changing farms to provide eggs for retail is neither simple nor quick. The farmer in this story says at least 5 other egg farms in Minnesota were doing the same thing. That's a great line of the story. Now farms are killing animals sooner than planned. Sooner than planned. We don't usually preach the gospel of vegetarianism here on Political Misfits, but it's Earth Day, and I don't know. I think it would be good if more of us would at least consider how we treat living things as just materials and treat their time on Earth and their deaths as simply product life cycles instead of lives. Maybe instead of constantly weighing with and what we can be cruel to and who we should value, we should try being less cruel and less callous across the board. Maybe that would actually help us stop, say, trying to argue that grandma wants to die if it means massage parlors can open again, or if it's okay to have people sleeping under highway overpasses, or to accidentally drown whole families into oblivion. Maybe we should work our way back to being horrified at the mass loss of life for our own appetites, be it for meat, oil, land, minerals, cheap labor. Maybe if we cut down our tolerance for cognitive dissonance, we'll slash our tolerance for mindless cruelty as well. I don't know. Rest in peace, 61,000 chickens. You were undoubtedly dumb, but you deserved better. Michelle Whitty, thank you for the rant. I love it. The preach, I guess I should say. I am one who subscribes greatly to what you have just said there. Unfortunately, Jamarl, am full of contradictions. I use oil. I use plenty of cheap labor in the goods I use. So I'm not going to get on my high horse about being a vegan, but eating healthy and being more conscious to the world, I think, is a good thing. And it makes your body feel much better, in my opinion. So Jamarl, here on Earth Day.
I agree with that. I'm not a vegetarian, but I do agree with that. I mean, look, I don't think it's a contradiction, right? I mean, we are born, we're raised in a society. At 3 years old, we're getting Happy Meals and French fries where we're sitting there like, oh, we love McDonald's and look at that clown and here's Burger King and so forth. And then you get hooked on that stuff through no power of your own. And then you have to kind of like, after 30 or 40 years, when you finally get your bearings and you get somewhat of an ideology of like, oh man, this is horrible, then you have to unwed yourself from it. And you have this kind of realization that I am killing stuff for my taste buds. Like, it seems so trivial when you put it in context, right?
What about, I guess, the contradiction? Like, I preach about not having child labor in Africa, but yet I still use a cell phone that uses tungsten and other precious metals from those continents.
Yeah, I mean, but how do you, it's difficult to kind of pull yourself away from it. My wife has taken an Earth Day thing every day, right? I think since I started doing my channel, she starts appropriating some of the stuff that I talk about, especially in environmental policy, and she brings it into the house. Some of it is aggravating, some of it is perfectly okay, but it is difficult to change over from the way you've operated for decades and to do it on a whim. And especially, and by the way, the vegetarian thing, there's a karmic price for that. Meaning, heart disease, cancers, like physical ailments, overweightness, like all of those things, like obesity, like these are things that come in line with directly relation to diet. And yeah, a high meat diet, removing a high meat diet can be one of those things that deals with heart disease almost entirely by itself. Like, so, it's not just, hey, let's not murder, but it's also, hey, this is also better for you. And so I'm a hypocrite when I say that. But
yeah, there's a great documentary, The Game Changers, great documentary on a vegan diet about how you can build more muscle and strength through a vegan diet. So this whole notion that there's not enough proteins or you can't build muscle, great documentary that shows a range of different athletes respond to that. Yeah, Jamarl, I always kind of joke that for me, it's kind of speciesism. It's always so strange that we've selected to eat some animals versus others and some we've domesticated, and the whole relationship with Mother Nature and the other things around us as a human society and culture. And I'll speak for Americans. It's so distorted because of capitalism that everything is seen as a profit. Even this fight around marijuana, as if marijuana wasn't just a natural thing that grew that could be used in a healthy way, but instead it's been politicized. It's been used as a tool to incarcerate people. It's been used to make money now as it unfolds. All of these things are of the earth, and yet we've turned them into capital products.
I love how you can have a Christian family who they can sit around the table and they can say, all right, we're going to say grace, perfect family. And as they're saying grace with all of the highest intentions and the highest ideals in the world, thinking of God and whatnot, they can then take a knife and they can cut into a pig and effectively eat a ham sandwich. This pig was tortured and everything else. For the most part, they didn't necessarily care this pig was being tortured. That pig was abused. Sometimes those animals are kicked and attacked, like horrible situations. And yet, this family is entirely decapitated from the process by which they're getting their foods. Now, my wife has done this. Well, we were in Iceland at one point, and we were at a burger joint, eating a hamburger, no issue. We were walking down the street at one point, and there's a duck that jumps out and eats, a swan eats a baby duck. Now, my wife gets pissed off at the duck, at the swan, as if, I'm like, but you just had a hamburger. Like, how are you angry at the swan for taking the bite out of this duckling when you've just had a hamburger? It's this type of stuff. So.
Yeah, it's all, that's why I said contradictions, how we see things. It's all quite fascinating, but be more conscious. At least if Earth Day serves any purpose, be more conscious and thoughtful towards the earth. Jamarl, we have to get out of here on Earth Day 2020. A big thank you to all of our guests. Sarah, Dady, Marvin Weinbaum, and David Swanson. A big thank you, as always, to our engineers, Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team working double hard to keep us on the air. Big thank you. Shout out to our producer, Michelle Whitty, as always. On behalf of Jamarl Thomas and myself, Bob Schlehuber, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, I want to thank all of you again for your support and visiting the channel. Let's kill this. I want to make sure the volume and everything is else good. All right, so we have 2 super chats. Xavier Foster. Trump is halting the green cards for 60 days so that the legal citizens can get back into the workforce first. The shelter in place caused mad job loss. Well, it was the coronavirus that caused the mad job loss. The shelter in place was in response so people wouldn't necessarily get ill. Donald Trump could have ensured that people were made whole by 80% of their salary, or getting rid of bills and rents and all of these other things, or for that matter, dealing with the virus early on when he was getting actual feedback from China in regards to how bad it was. So, I understand there was large job loss. That's true. That's fair enough. But let's be clear, nobody is immigrating into the country anyway right now. So all of this becomes a certain degree of political posturing that he's used to go with the security angle. I'm Trump, I'm the one who's fighting for your jobs, etc., etc. It's politics, it's not reality to it. Otherwise, it's a power grab. That's the other part. Ask for peace. UN warns pandemic multiple famines of biblical proportions. I saw that one also. Guys, I want to thank you. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.